It happened on a Sunday, the kind of quiet day when families are supposed to gather over coffee and easy laughter. But in my house, the house I built brick by brick beside the man who now wanted nothing to do with me, it ended with a sentence I'll never forget. "Mum, we've decided it's time for you to leave." The words came out of my son's mouth like they belonged to someone else. His wife sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her silence sharper than any accusation. I stood there, blinking against the sunlight pouring through the kitchen window, feeling like a guest in my own life. This was the home where I bandaged his scraped knees, where I taught him how to fold laundry, where I stayed awake through every fever and heartbreak. And now, I didn't even belong on the title of its story. I wanted to scream, I wanted to beg, but all I did was nod. I packed the old green suitcase I hadn't used since the last family trip when he was still my little boy, not someone else's husband, not someone else's protector. And when I thought the day couldn't fracture any further, my phone rang. Richard, my husband, or what was left of him. "I filed the papers," he said, his voice flat, clinical. "I'll have my lawyer send them to you this week. No apology, no regret. Just paperwork and finality." So there I stood, outside my own home, one hand gripping the suitcase, the other clutching a house key that no longer unlocked anything I recognised. The door closed behind me with a quiet click. I waited for it to open again, for someone to realise what they had done. But no one came. So I walked to my car, feeling the weight of 30 years in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay where I wasn't wanted. And in that still, hollow afternoon, I whispered a truth I never thought I'd hear from my own lips. Maybe they never needed me. Maybe they just forgot how to say it. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday dinner: roast chicken, garlic, mashed potatoes, the lemon pie recipe passed down from my mother, the kind of meal that once brought our family together. But that night, the table felt colder than the ceramic plates. Emily barely touched her food, her smile polite but thin. My son, my only son, avoided my gaze, carving slow circles into his mashed potatoes, like he was waiting for the right moment to speak. And I, foolishly clinging to routine, asked the question I always did. "So, how's work been, sweetheart?" The silence stretched too long. Emily was the one who filled it. "Actually, we've been doing a lot of thinking about our next steps." Her tone was calm, almost rehearsed. I smiled, cautious. "Next steps? Career moves?" She exchanged a glance with my son, then continued. "No. Family moves, space, independence." The words slipped in like blades covered in silk. She set down her fork, folding her napkin neatly beside her plate. "We think it's time we start living as our own unit. Build a home that reflects our life, not what we've inherited." "Inherited?" I forced a laugh, brittle and thin. "Sweetheart, this house is your home too. It always has been." My son finally spoke, voice quiet but firm. "That's just it, Mom. It's always been yours. We need something that's ours." I felt the air leave the room, though no windows were open. I took a sip of water, steadying my voice. "Well, I've thought about downsizing someday, but I never imagined—" Emily interrupted gently, her words coated in sugar. "We've already found a place for you, a retirement condo near the park, modern, quiet, perfect for starting your next chapter." Next chapter. As if my story had already ended. I looked at my son, searching his face for some crack of uncertainty, but he sat still, hands folded, a man who had already made peace with his betrayal. And just like that, the dinner I spent hours preparing turned cold on our plates. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just the quiet click of a family closing the door on what no longer fit. I put down my fork and smiled as best I could. Well then, I said softly, I suppose I should start packing. They both nodded, relieved, like it was always supposed to end this way. The plates had barely been cleared when the final blow came. I was rinsing a dish, letting the warm water run over my trembling hands, when my son spoke. His voice carried across the kitchen like a verdict. Mom, this house isn't your home anymore. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was final. I set the dish down slowly, the clink of porcelain against porcelain sounding louder than anything else in the room. I turned, searching his face for some sign of doubt, but there was none. Emily stood beside him, calm and composed. This isn't personal. It's just families nowadays build their own space, living together. It's not how things work anymore. Her words fell like carefully stacked bricks, walling me out of the life I built. I forced a smile, small and brittle. I thought this house belonged to all of us. My son shook his head softly but firmly. It belonged to who we were, not who we are. I felt my stomach tighten, but I held my ground. When do you expect me to leave? I asked quietly, already knowing the answer would hurt. Emily glanced at her phone as if this was an appointment to confirm. We're meeting the realtor this Friday. She'll help start the listing process next week. This Friday, 4 days. 4 days. To erase decades of birthdays, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. I looked at my son one more time. Have you really thought this through? He hesitated, just for a moment. But Emily's hand found his arm, steadying him. And just like that, his doubt disappeared. It's what's best for everyone, he said, his voice rehearsed. We need a fresh start. Fresh for them, empty for me. I wiped my hands on a towel, each movement slower than the last. All right, I whispered. If that's what you've decided. Emily smiled, relieved, as if my quiet compliance was the final piece of her perfect plan. And in that small kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of our family's laughter, I realised something I hadn't before. It wasn't the house they wanted gone. It was me. That night, I packed like a ghost moving through her own story. I pulled the old green suitcase from the back of the closet, the one I bought when we first moved into this house. Its worn leather edges reminded me of road trips and family vacations, of beginnings that felt nothing like this ending. I filled it with the things no one else would notice missing. A faded sweater my mother knit, a photo of my son as a toddler, his arms wrapped around my neck, the cookbook with my handwritten notes in the margins. I didn't take much. The house wasn't empty without me, just quieter. Downstairs, the air felt colder, like the walls had already started erasing me. On the kitchen counter, I saw the mail I hadn't sorted yet. Among the grocery coupons and electricity bill sat something I hadn't expected, the house deed. Still in my name, a reminder that on paper, this house was mine. But in reality, it belonged to people who no longer wanted me in it. I placed the deed in my purse without a word, not as revenge, but because I wasn't ready to let them write me out completely. As I zipped the suitcase closed, I spotted the house key resting in its usual spot by the door. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. I could have left it on the counter, could have tossed it into a drawer and walked away for good, but I slipped it into my coat pocket instead. Maybe I wasn't ready to give it up. Maybe part of me hoped they'd remember who first opened this door. When morning came, I carried the suitcase to the front door. No one came downstairs. No one offered to help. It was easier for them to stay upstairs, wrapped in fresh sheets and cleaner consciences. I paused on the porch, feeling the autumn air wrap around me like a quiet goodbye. I didn't slam the door. Didn't leave a note. I simply walked away, carrying what little they hadn't taken and what they never truly understood. This house wasn't the only home I knew how to build. The streets blurred past my window as I drove with no destination. I wasn't running away. I just couldn't stay still. I pulled into the empty parking lot of a diner we used to visit on Friday nights, where Richard once told me he'd never leave me alone in this world. Funny how easy promises are in the warmth of shared coffee cups. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. For a moment, I thought no. Hoped it was my son. That maybe he regretted it. That maybe someone finally realised what they'd done. But the screen showed a different name. Richard. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. Then, with a breath too shallow to steady me, I answered, "Hello." No warmth greeted me, no soft apology, just rustling papers and the clink of glass in the background. "I filed the divorce papers today," he said flatly. "You'll get them next week. My lawyer will handle the rest." The words struck without warning, sharp and surgical. I stared at the dashboard, unable to find words that mattered. He continued, efficient and distant. "I've taken care of the financial division. We'll keep it clean." I figured that's what you'd want. What I wanted? What I wanted vanished long before this conversation. I swallowed hard, voice barely holding. "Okay, send them." A pause, brief but heavy. Then, almost as an afterthought, "I'll be out of town next week. Don't try to reach me." The line went dead. No goodbye. No thank you for the years. No acknowledgement that what we built was more than a legal arrangement. I let the phone fall onto the seat, landing beside the green suitcase that now held the remains of my life. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. First my son, now my husband. Both of them closing the door and locking it behind them. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, letting the weight of the day press down without resistance. The house key in my pocket dug into my side, a cruel reminder of all the doors now closed to me. And in that quiet parking lot, surrounded by the echo of broken promises, I whispered the words no one else would say. "You're on your own now." And somehow, hearing it aloud hurt less than keeping it trapped inside. I didn't plan to go back, but my suitcase was still half packed, and I wasn't ready to leave parts of myself behind for strangers to sort through. The house was silent when I unlocked the door. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum of someone else's life. I walked through the familiar rooms, each step echoing in the emptiness they left behind. Then I saw it. On the kitchen table, right where we used to play board games and share Sunday breakfasts, sat a manila envelope, plain, clinical, my name scrawled across the front in Richard's handwriting. For a moment, I didn't move. If I didn't open it, maybe it wasn't real, but reality doesn't wait for permission. I tore it open, fingers trembling despite the calm I tried to wear like armour. Inside were the divorce papers, signed, notarized, already done. No letter, no explanation, just a quiet erasure of 30 years. I sat down at the table, the same table where we once planned vacations, budgeted for Christmas, argued over who forgot to buy milk. Now it held nothing but endings. I read through the lines slowly, tracing each word like they might dissolve beneath my fingertips. The house wasn't listed. My name still on the deed, a legal technicality they hadn't bothered to fix. Funny how something as cold as paperwork could hold the last thread of power I didn't know I had. I set the papers aside and stared at the walls. They looked back at me blankly. No comfort, no accusation. Just tired drywall waiting for new memories to cover the cracks. I gathered the envelope, folding it neatly, and slipped it into my bag alongside the house key. Two things that still had my name, even if no one else wanted it there. I stood in the kitchen for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle in, and for the first time that day, I felt something other than loss. I felt tired, bone deep, soul tired, but still standing. I turned off the lights and left the table in the dark, taking only what was mine to carry. The rest they could keep. The engine hummed softly as I pulled out of the driveway for the last time. No one waved goodbye, no one watched from the window. Maybe they thought I'd already left, or maybe, in their minds, I had been gone for years. The streetlights flickered on one by one as I drove through the familiar streets, past the grocery store where I bought his birthday cakes, past the little park where we spent summer afternoons chasing shadows. I wasn't sure where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. The divorce papers sat beside me on the passenger seat, folded but heavy. The house key rested in my coat pocket, cool against my side. It felt strange, carrying both the past and the end of it in the same car. I stopped at a red light, the world outside rushing past as if I didn't exist. 2 teenagers crossed the street laughing. An old man walked his dog. Life carried on, and here I was, somewhere between who I used to be and who I hadn't figured out yet. I thought about calling someone, my sister, maybe, but what would I say? Guess who lost her house and husband before dessert? I let the phone sit silent. Some silences don't need to be filled. I kept driving until the town faded behind me, the lights shrinking in the rearview mirror like distant stars. Eventually, I found a small motel off the highway. A vacancy sign flickered in the darkness, welcoming in a tired kind of way. I checked in with cash. No questions, no explanations. The room was quiet, a thin curtain barely keeping the night at bay. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the stillness settle over me. For the first time that day, I let the tears fall, quiet, steady. Not for him, not for the house, but for the version of myself I had to leave behind. When the tears stopped, I wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would come, whether I was ready or not. But tonight, I survived. And sometimes that's enough. The next morning, the motel felt colder than I remembered from the night before. I woke early, packed my few things, and drove without thinking. Some part of me knew where I was going before I did. An hour later, I turned onto the gravel road that led to my mother's old cottage, the place where summers smelled like fresh-cut grass and winters crackled with the wood stove's warmth. No one had lived there for years. The paint peeled from the shutters. The screen door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, but it still stood, and so did I. I unlocked the door with the spare key still hidden under the loose porch step. Some habits, thankfully, outlast pain. Inside, the air smelled like dust and lavender soap. Faded curtains swayed in the breeze, and the worn floor creaked beneath my steps. I set my suitcase down by the old rocking chair, the same chair where my mother sat reading bedtime stories to a little girl who never imagined she'd grow up to feel this alone. I ran my fingers across the fireplace mantel, tracing dust-covered photographs in cracked frames. Smiling faces from a time when family wasn't so complicated. I dropped onto the couch, exhaustion folding over me like an old quilt. Here, in this forgotten corner of my life, the world couldn't reach me. Not my son's cold words, not Richard's final papers, just me and the quiet. I stared at the ceiling, breathing in the silence. Maybe this was what healing looked like in its earliest form. Not big revelations, not dramatic endings, just the stillness of a house no one else remembered. I thought about staying here forever, letting the rest of the world pass me by. But a voice, faint but familiar, whispered in my mind, my mother's voice. You were never meant to disappear. Rest, but don't vanish. I smiled, small and tired. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight I had found shelter in the one place that still felt like home, and for now, that was enough. The cottage was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the old wall clock. I was halfway through unpacking my suitcase when the phone rang. The sound startled me. Not because it was loud, but because I didn't expect anyone to call. I glanced at the screen. Virginia area code. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. Then I remembered Megan, my niece, the girl who used to braid my hair at family barbecues and send me birthday texts long after my son forgot. I answered. Hello? Her voice was hesitant but warm. Aunt Sarah, I heard what happened. Mum called me. I sat down on the worn couch, the weight of the conversation already settling in my chest. Did she now? I managed, a quiet smile slipping through my exhaustion. Megan paused, uncertain. I wanted to see how you were holding up. I know it's a lot. I let the silence linger for a moment. No one's asked me that yet. Thank you for being the first. She exhaled, soft and relieved. I hate that you're alone in that old house. Do you want me to come visit? I could take a few days off, maybe bring you some groceries or just sit with you. Her offer caught me off guard. Not pity, not obligation, just kindness. I smiled, tears prickling the corners of my eyes. That's sweet of you, honey, but I think I need to sit with myself first, for a little while. She didn't argue, didn't try to fix it. She just said, okay. But if you change your mind, I'm one call away. Seriously, I'll drive up. No questions asked. The lump in my throat tightened, but this time it wasn't from pain. Thank you, Megan. That means more than you know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was safe. Then she asked, softly, do you still have the house key? I smiled, running my fingers across the fabric of my coat. Yeah, I still have it. Good. Don't let them take everything. And in that moment, her voice felt like a lighthouse in the fog. We said our goodbyes quietly, like folding a note you plan to reread later. When the call ended, the silence returned. But it didn't feel as lonely anymore. Somehow, in this empty house, I didn't feel entirely forgotten. After Megan's call ended, the cottage grew quiet again. But it was a softer quiet this time, like the space between notes in a sad song. I sat by the fireplace, the old rocking chair creaking gently beneath me, and stared at the house key resting on the side table. For years, that key meant home, belonging, purpose. Now it felt like a leftover from a story no one wanted to finish. I whispered into the empty room. Who am I now? No one answered. I thought of all the roles I used to fill. Mother, wife, caregiver. Each one dissolved in the space of a single day. My son didn't need me to care for him anymore. My husband didn't want me beside him anymore. I wrapped my arms around my knees and spoke the words I hadn't dared say aloud until now. No one needs me. They landed softly, but hit like stones. It was a strange kind of grief mourning the living, the people who still existed, but no longer had a place for me in their lives. I thought about going back to them, apologizing for things I didn't do, begging for scraps of belonging. But another voice, faint but firm, whispered from the quiet, "You don't beg for your worth." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall silently. The house creaked as the wind brushed against the windows. Somehow, even this forgotten place seemed to breathe with me. I glanced at the house key again, running my fingers along its worn edges. Maybe I didn't belong in their house anymore, but that didn't mean I had nowhere left to be. I wiped my face, steadying my breath. I wasn't needed right now, and that hurt. But it didn't mean I didn't matter. I stood slowly, letting the weight of those words settle into my bones. No one needs me, but I'm still here. And sometimes, surviving the quiet is the bravest thing you can do. I wasn't expecting visitors. Least of all, Thomas Reed, the family attorney who had watched my life unravel one legal document at a time. He showed up late in the afternoon, knocking softly like he didn't want to startle the house. "Sarah," he said gently, holding his briefcase like it weighed less than the conversation we were about to have. "Mind if I come in?" I stepped aside, motioning toward the worn living room chairs. He sat carefully, his presence calm, but uncomfortably steady. "I heard from Richard's office," he began. "And, well, I thought you should know something before this Friday's realtor meeting." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" He opened his briefcase, pulling out a copy of the house deed. "Your name's still on it," he said simply. "Richard never filed a joint ownership transfer. On paper, it's yours, solely." The words hung in the air like dust motes caught in sunlight. I stared at the document, tracing the faded signature that once made me proud. It was still there, still mine. "They can't sell the house without your consent," Thomas continued. "No legal listing, no valid sale, even if your son thinks otherwise." I let the silence stretch between us, weighing his words against the ache in my chest. "I don't want to fight them," I whispered. "I just didn't expect to be erased this quietly." Thomas offered a faint smile. "You don't have to fight, but you do have the right to decide what happens next." That word right felt foreign. After days of having decisions made for me, it felt almost too sharp to hold. I folded the deed carefully, placing it beside me on the couch. "Thank you, Thomas, for telling me." He nodded, rising slowly. "If you want to talk options before Friday, call me. Otherwise, trust your gut. You've always had a good one." I smiled faintly, walking him to the door. Before he left, he paused, looking back at me with something almost like kindness. "You built that home. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." And with that, he left. I stood in the doorway long after his car disappeared down the gravel road. For the first time in days, I felt something stir beneath the weight of grief. Not anger, not revenge, just choice. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to carry me through Friday. That night, I couldn't sleep. Thomas's words circled in my mind like moths around a porch light. My house, my name. I rose from bed before the sun crested the horizon, pulling on an old cardigan that still smelled faintly of lavender and dust. In the hall closet, buried beneath forgotten photo albums and outgrown coats, I found it. A dented metal file box, the kind we used to keep tucked away, just in case. Funny how just in case finally arrived. I carried it to the kitchen table, the same table where Richard once reviewed our taxes, where my son learned to balance a checkbook. The lock clicked open, revealing years of our life, stacked in fading manila folders. I thumbed through documents that felt like relics from another life. Birth certificates, insurance claims, old birthday cards tucked between financial statements. And there it was, the original property deed, dated, signed, notarized, my name alone printed across the top in faded type. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the letters like they belonged to someone I barely remembered. So much of my life had been poured into those walls. Every scraped knee, every birthday candle, every argument and late-night apology, and somehow I forgot I built that life. I thought about how easily they had decided to erase me from it, as if love was a lease they could cancel when it no longer suited them. But this deed, this simple yellowing piece of paper, said otherwise. It said I was still part of the foundation. I stacked the papers neatly, placing the deed on top, not because it was power, but because it was truth. I could fight them on Friday. I could stall the sale. I could protect what little I still owned. But the question lingered, did I want to? I sat there in the quiet, the house key cold in my pocket, the divorce papers tucked beneath the deed. Power didn't feel the way I thought it would. It wasn't loud, it wasn't triumphant, it was quiet and heavy. But it was mine. I gathered the papers into a folder and slipped it beside my suitcase, the weight of it strangely comforting. I didn't know what I would do yet, but for the first time in days, the decision was mine to make. The next morning, a text buzzed through my phone like a warning bell. "Hi, Sarah. This is Laura from Westridge Realty, just confirming the pre-sale walkthrough Friday morning at 9 a.m. Looking forward to finalising the listing next week." Finalising, as if it were already done. I stared at the message, heart tightening. I hadn't even packed my books, and they were already scheduling strangers to walk through the life I built. I called Thomas. He answered on the first ring. "They've scheduled a walkthrough," I said quietly. "Friday morning." He sighed, unsurprised. "They're counting on you not showing up, hoping you'll let this happen quietly." What do I do? You could show up with the deed in hand and stop it cold, or we file a temporary injunction before then. But the clock's ticking. You've got 2 days. 2 days. I hung up, my thoughts spiralling. I didn't want to fight, but silence wasn't safety. It was surrender. Later that afternoon, through the cottage window, I saw a car I recognised pull into the driveway. My son. Alone. He stepped out, phone in hand, pacing near the porch. I cracked the door, just enough to hear. "I don't know if we should rush this, Em. She still has the deed." A pause. Her voice crackled faintly through the speaker, sharp but measured. "She won't stop us. She never does. Just stay firm." He ran a hand through his hair, looking towards the trees, like they held answers. "I don't want this to be ugly. She's still my mum." For a moment, my chest softened. But then his shoulders straightened, his voice flattening. "Okay, we'll go through with it. Friday morning. No delays." He turned and walked back to his car, the engine fading down the road. And just like that, the hesitation vanished. But I had heard it. The crack beneath the surface, the part of him that still remembered who I was. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. I had 2 choices now, show up and stop them, or stay silent and let them believe I was gone for good. Friday morning waited like a closed door. I still had the key. Friday morning, the house looked almost staged. Fresh flowers on the entryway table, neutral-coloured pillows fluffed just right, as if the love that built this home could be wiped away with good lighting. I stood outside for a moment, the house deed folded in my bag, the key cold in my pocket. Then I knocked. Emily opened the door, her smile quick and thin. "Oh, you came, as you can see." Her parents hovered near the kitchen, whispering over coffee. And there, by the window, stood the realtor, young, polished, and clearly uncomfortable. My son stood by the fireplace, hands tucked in his pockets, gaze flicking from me to Emily, unsure where to land. "Mom?" he greeted, voice tight. "We thought maybe you'd want to sit this one out." I stepped inside, quiet but steady. It's still my home. I thought I'd join the tour. The realtor cleared her throat, flipping through her clipboard. Legally, we'll need all owners present for the walkthrough anyway. Transparency is important for the buyers." Emily's smile thinned further. "Of course. We wouldn't do anything without full transparency." Her tone said otherwise. The tour began, as the realtor spoke about potential upgrades and modern renovations. I watched my son shift uncomfortably. He ran a hand along the kitchen counter, the same one where we rolled cookie dough when he was 6. The realtor paused beside the staircase. "So, will the title transfer be ready by next week?" My son hesitated. Emily answered for him. "Yes, it's already in motion." I met his eyes then. He looked away. There it was again, that crack beneath his calm. I set my bag on the coffee table, pulling out the deed and laying it flat. "Actually," I said softly, "it's not." The room stilled. The realtor blinked, looking between us. I'm sorry. I wasn't informed of. You wouldn't be, I said gently, because no one asked. Emily's mother shifted, clearing her throat. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, dear. No need for drama. Drama. What they call it when a woman refuses to disappear quietly. I smiled, small but certain. We'll postpone the sale discussion for now, until further notice. My son opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Emily's eyes flashed, but she stayed silent. And in that quiet, for the first time in weeks, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. The room held its breath after I laid the deed on the table. It was Emily who finally broke the silence. She stepped forward, voice calm but threaded with something deeper. I know what this looks like, she began, folding her arms loosely across her chest. But this isn't about pushing you out, Sarah. It's about creating space. Her gaze flicked to my son, searching for support. When none came, she continued, I grew up without a mother, just me, my dad, and an empty apartment that never felt like home. The words landed softer than I expected. I promised myself, she said, voice steadying, that when I had a family it would be different. We'd build our own home, our own traditions, not live in someone else's. The ache in her voice was real, but so was the sharp edge beneath it, as she stepped closer to the table, fingers brushing the edge of the deed. This house isn't just yours, Sarah. It's a museum of your life, your memories, but none of it feels like mine. I met her gaze, steady and calm. It wasn't supposed to be yours yet. A flicker of something hurt. Frustration crossed her face. I understand, she said quietly. But understanding doesn't mean we stop needing our own place to breathe. Families grow, they change, and sometimes that means making room by letting go. For a brief second, the mask dropped. I saw the girl beneath the woman, the child who waited for a home that never arrived, but I also saw the woman who didn't know how to share one. My son shifted beside her, his silence no longer protective, but exposed. Emily let out a slow breath. We're not asking you to leave your life behind. We're asking you to let us start ours. It wasn't cruelty. It was convenience. I closed the folder containing the deed, my voice low but certain. Starting your life doesn't require ending mine. She blinked, surprised by the quiet weight of my words. I stood, gathering my things. This conversation isn't over, but for today, it's paused. I turned toward the door, leaving them in the home they were so desperate to claim, and as I stepped outside, the autumn air felt sharp but honest, somewhere between their future and my past. I still had choices to make. I closed the front door behind me, the sound softer than I expected. No one followed, no one called my name, and maybe that silence hurt more than anything they said inside. I walked down the front steps, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my feet, each step carrying pieces of my past, but none of their permission. In my bag rested the house deed, creased but intact. In my coat pocket, the house key. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but they didn't know what I carried beneath the silence. Every scraped knee I'd kissed better. Every night I stayed awake while fevers broke. Every sacrifice folded quietly into dinners and homework help and forgotten birthdays. They didn't see those things, but I did, and that mattered more than the bricks and wood they were so eager to claim. I reached my car, placing the bag in the passenger seat, and for a moment I just stood there, breathing. I thought of what Emily said, that I was a shadow in their life, a remnant of something they didn't ask for, but shadows only fall when there's light behind them. I smiled, soft and small, slipping the key deeper into my pocket. Not because I planned to return, but because sometimes keeping a piece of what they tried to erase reminds you that you were there. I started the engine, the hum steady and sure, and looked at the house through the windshield one last time. The curtains fluttered in the window, but no faces watched me go, and that was fine. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I carried my story, the one they couldn't sell or sign away. I carried my love, quiet and battered, but mine, and most of all, I carried myself. Not broken, not erased, just walking away on my own terms. As I pulled onto the road, the house faded behind the trees, and I whispered to the wind, steady and true, "You don't get to take everything." The cottage welcomed me back with the same quiet it had before. No questions, no expectations, just walls that didn't ask where I'd been. I set my bag down on the old armchair, the house deed slipping out and landing softly on the floor. I didn't bother picking it up right away. The house key weighed down my pocket, like a story I hadn't finished reading. I sank into the worn rocking chair, its gentle creak filling the silence like a lullaby I didn't know I needed. The room smelled of dust and old pine, and for once the emptiness didn't feel cruel. It felt honest. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion settle in my bones. I thought leaving would feel like freedom. It didn't. It felt like walking away from a fire you built, leaving behind the warmth because it burned too close to your skin. But sitting here now, in the quiet, I realized something else. Maybe quiet wasn't the absence of life. Maybe it was where life finally got a chance to breathe. I let my fingers trace the seam of the rocking chair's arm, remembering my mother's hands doing the same when she read to me as a child. She never spoke much about starting over. She just did it, quietly, without fanfare. Maybe that's what I was doing now. I opened my eyes and looked at the deed on the floor. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and placed it on the coffee table. I didn't know if I would keep the house. I didn't know if I even wanted to. But I knew this. I wasn't going to let them decide for me again. For tonight, that was enough. I wrapped the old quilt around my shoulders and leaned back in the chair, letting the fading light fill the room. The world outside kept turning. But here, in this quiet space between what was and what could be, I found a small piece of peace. It was near dusk when I heard the knock, soft, almost apologetic. I stayed seated in the rocking chair, letting the moment stretch longer than it needed to. When I finally opened the door, there he stood, my son, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, shoulders rounded like a boy who knew he was out of excuses. "Mom," he said, voice hesitant, "I wasn't sure you'd still be here." "Where else would I be?" I asked softly, no bitterness in my tone, just truth. He shifted on the porch, glancing past me into the cottage. "It's smaller than I remembered." "It's enough," I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. "I didn't come to argue," he said, voice lower. I wanted to check if you're okay." I waited, because rushing him would have broken the fragile courage it took for him to stand there. After a beat, he looked down at the porch step, scuffing his shoe against the wood. "I didn't want it to happen like this," he whispered. "Then why did it?" My words were gentle, but they didn't let him off the hook. He sighed, the sound sharp in the cool evening air. "Because it was easier, and I didn't know how to tell you we wanted something else, without hurting you." I met his eyes then, tired, torn, still searching for the right version of himself. "Easier doesn't mean better," I said quietly. He looked away, biting his lip like a child caught in a lie. And then, hesitantly, he pulled something from his pocket. The spare house key I gave him when he was 16. He held it out, palm open. "I guess you'll need this back." I didn't take it. Instead, I closed his fingers gently over the key. "Keep it, for when you find your way home." A flicker of something regret, hope, crossed his face. He nodded, turning to leave, but paused at the edge of the porch. I don't know how to fix this yet. You don't have to, I said softly. Just don't pretend it's not broken. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, then walked away, footsteps fading down the gravel drive. I closed the door gently behind him, the cottage quiet once more. But this time it didn't feel quite so empty. The next morning, the sun rose through the thin curtains, painting the cottage in soft gold. I sat at the kitchen table, the house deed resting beside a lukewarm cup of tea. For the first time in days, the decision didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a door quietly waiting to be opened or closed. I gathered my things slowly, not because I was reluctant, but because rushing felt unnecessary. The green suitcase, the deed, the house key, all symbols of a life I had lived and a life I was ready to leave behind. I stepped outside, the autumn air crisp against my cheeks. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked to the car, each step lighter than the last. I looked back at the cottage, not with regret, but with quiet gratitude. It had given me what I needed. A place to fall apart, a place to gather myself again. I slipped the house key into my coat pocket, not as a plan to return, but as a reminder that some doors you leave closed and some you keep unlocked, just in case life surprises you. As I drove away, the trees blurred past my window, their leaves burning red and gold like they were celebrating my quiet escape. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew this. I wasn't running anymore. I was walking away on my own terms. No one forced me out this time. No ultimatums, no hasty packing. Just me choosing peace over proof, freedom over resentment. The house faded in the rearview mirror, but its lessons stayed with me. Love can build walls or doors, but it can't lock you inside unless you hand over the key. I whispered to the empty car, a small smile creeping across my lips. You did your best, Sarah. Now it's time to do what's next. And for the first time in weeks, the quiet didn't sound like failure. It sounded like possibility. The apartment was smaller than I imagined. One bedroom, a modest kitchen, and a balcony barely wide enough for a chair, but it was mine. No family pictures on the walls yet. No noise from anyone else's footsteps. Just quiet, and the hum of the city outside. I unpacked slowly, letting each item find its place. The green suitcase slid under the bed. The house key rested in a small bowl by the door, no longer something I carried, but something I kept. I made tea and stood by the window, watching life unfold below. A couple argued quietly outside the corner grocery store. Two teenagers skateboarded down the street, their laughter echoing against brick walls. Farther away, I heard someone mention housing prices. They're insane this year. Can't afford anything bigger than a shoebox. Life was busy moving on, unaware that my world had stopped for a while, and somehow that made me smile. Because pain feels smaller when you realize the world never paused for it. I sat at the small kitchen table, running my fingers over the cup's smooth edge. The silence here wasn't sharp like the cottage's had been. It was softer, a beginning, not an ending. I thought of calling someone, maybe Megan or Thomas, but let the phone stay face down on the counter. Tonight wasn't about filling the quiet. It was about learning to sit with it. The streetlight flickered outside, casting long shadows across the empty living room. I didn't know what came next, but for now, having a door that locked from the inside, not the outside, felt like enough. I tucked the house deed into a drawer, out of sight, but not forgotten. It was part of my story, but not the only part. Tomorrow, maybe I'd buy a plant for the windowsill, or learn the neighbour's name. But tonight, I let myself be alone, not abandoned, not cast out, alone, and finally at peace with it. It happened at the coffee shop down the block. I was waiting for my order, tucked in the corner with a paperback I wasn't really reading, when two women sat at the table beside me, their voices carried softly through the hum of morning traffic and espresso machines. "I guess she's just not needed anymore," one said, laughing lightly. "You know how some mums can't let go." The words hit like a chime from an old clock, familiar, unwanted, but this time, something in me didn't shatter. I sipped my coffee, letting the sentence settle instead of sink, because I had said those words before, in anger, in pain, in loneliness, and hearing them now, from strangers who didn't know my story, I realised they were only true if I let them be. I finished my coffee and walked home, the fall breeze brushing against my jacket. Back in the apartment, I pulled out my old journal from the suitcase. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and years gone by. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, and wrote the sentence down, slowly. No one needs me. But then I added something I'd never thought to write before, and that's not the end of my story. I stared at the words, letting them rest on the page like a quiet truth. Maybe no one needed me in the ways they used to, but I still needed myself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I closed the journal gently, setting it beside the house key on the shelf. Both were part of my past. Neither defined my future. Outside, a neighbour laughed with his daughter as they walked their dog down the street. Life, still unfolding, still moving forward. I smiled, small but real. Sometimes, the words that once broke you become the ones you outgrow. That night, the quiet wrapped around me like a familiar coat. Not heavy, not suffocating, just there steady and earned. I sat by the window, the street lights casting soft shadows across the hardwood floor. The journal rested beside the house key on the shelf, two remnants of a life I carried, but no longer lived inside of. For years, I thought quiet meant I had lost the fight. That silence meant no one cared, but now it felt like something else entirely, a pause, a breath between battles. I let the calm settle in my chest, steadying my pulse, clearing the noise that had filled my days for too long. No one knocked at my door. No voices called from another room. And still, I wasn't alone. I had myself. I walked to the kitchen, made a cup of tea, and sat in the worn armchair by the window. Not because I was waiting for anyone, but because I finally understood I didn't have to. The world outside hummed on without me. Neighbours laughed on their porches. A distant siren cut through the night. Somewhere, someone else was beginning again. And for once, I didn't feel left behind. I felt placed, exactly where I needed to be. I smiled softly, wrapping the blanket tighter around my shoulders. No declarations, no grand plans, just this moment and the quiet strength it carried. I whispered into the night, "You did enough, Sarah. You are enough." The words didn't echo back. They didn't need to, because sometimes the most valiant thing a person can do is sit with the quiet and not let it undo them. Weeks passed. The apartment filled slowly. A thrifted bookshelf here, a potted fern by the window, a worn blanket draped over the armchair. But one thing remained untouched, the small wooden box on the shelf. Inside it, the house key, the deed now folded away, and the journal where I wrote the words that once broke me. One afternoon I opened the box again, not because I needed anything from it, but because I wanted to remember that I could close it whenever I chose. I turned the house key over in my hand, tracing its worn edges. It no longer felt like a ticket back, or a weight I couldn't drop. It felt like what it was, a chapter I wrote, lived, and survived. I smiled softly, slipping the key back into the box. I didn't throw it away, not because I planned to return, but because some doors, even when closed, deserve to be remembered, and maybe, just maybe, one day my son would stand at his own door, holding his key, wondering what he'd built and who he might invite inside. I couldn't write that part of his story, but I could keep mine safe until then. The afternoon light shifted across the floor, casting long, quiet shadows that didn't scare me anymore. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching life go on without waiting for anyone's permission. And in that peaceful quiet, I whispered to no one but myself. I kept the key, just in case.